Today's video was inspired by very fresh statements from two Hollywood megastars, Scarlett Johansson and Charlize Theron. Each in their own manner, but essentially complaining about life, the fairness of their fate, profession, about how terribly women live in Hollywood, how they suffer from men or cannot compete with them on equal terms. Meanwhile, Johansson cries about being objectified, sexualized, and so forth. Theron laments that women trying themselves in the action genre have only one chance. While nasty men are forgiven even several failures, everything comes to them for free. And I became interested whether this is really how things stand now. Are Hollywood stars really as unhappy and oppressed as one might think when listening to them? Or is the situation actually different? Spoiler, it's not just different. And prepare to be amazed for the next 10 minutes. We'll discuss all details right now. So, let's start with Charlize Theron. As it turned out, the actress sounds the alarm, criticizing what she considers unfair conditions for women in Hollywood, particularly in action film. Thus, in a recent interview, Theron stated that Hollywood gives male stars much more chances to succeed in the action genre even after their failures, unlike women. Further quote, "Yes, it's much harder. This is known," says Theron. "Action films with female protagonists receive less approval than films with men. It always upsets me that guys get all this for free," she continued, which essentially made a very strong attack, if not a spit in the face of her male colleagues. Though this isn't everything. And Charlize continued her tirade, saying that when women do this and the film possibly isn't successful, they probably won't get another chance. Studios aren't ready to take such risk. But they're ready to risk repeatedly with the same actor who possibly already has a series of action films that weren't very successful. This is simply outrageous." End quote. So, obviously, Charlize Theron, who herself appeared in action films, now leads everything to the fact that women are often given only one chance to succeed in this genre before being pushed to the background, while men live much easier. But does the actress's criticism reflect the current state of affairs in Hollywood, or is she just complaining in a well-worn manner, while objective data says the opposite? Well, let's figure it out. And start with the fact that indeed, 20 to 30 years ago, action, or generally action, was more a male story. Although even then, there were many cult female roles. Take the same Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, Linda Hamilton in Terminators, or Mila Jovovich in The Fifth Element, and, of course, Resident Evil. And not only examples here can be given much more, but this was long ago, and all the aforementioned films became hits. But how do things stand now? And now, let's say, the last 5 to 10 years, it turns out that despite Theron's statement, studios invested significant funds and forces in action films featuring women, especially in the last 5 years. However, many of these projects still failed at the box office, even being connected to major franchises. Take, for example, a theme close to Charlize herself, the Mad Max saga and the film Furiosa. This movie just sought to put a cool female protagonist at the forefront, but unfortunately didn't cope with this task. Therefore, according to experts' estimates, losses for Warner from Furiosa amounted to 75 to 120 million bucks. Similarly failed Madame Web with Dakota Johnson, which, despite direct connection to the Spider-Man universe, also brought tens of millions of dollars in losses to Sony Company. Another fresh example is the film Ballerina Sands, a movie they tried to promote thanks to Keanu Reeves' star power and John Wick character's popularity, but ultimately it didn't become a hit and couldn't break even at the box office. Meanwhile, we see that studios very actively, and with huge investments tried in recent years to develop precisely female action films, tying to major popular franchises, but unfortunately didn't succeed. And yes, indeed, probably those films we just mentioned won't get sequels. So, what turns out is Charlize Theron right? The answer will be that actually no. Why? Because failed male action films or action movies also often don't evoke any desire in movie studios to invest crazy money in their continuation. Take, for example, the Flash film with Ezra Miller, which after its box office failure not only lost ghostly hope for a sequel, unlike, by the way, the same Ballerina, but finally killed Miller's Hollywood career. Want more examples? Yes, please. Moreover, from the same DC cinematic universe, the second Shazam, which was filmed after the first part's success and which, unlike it, turned out to be a failure, after which no one even held hypothetical talks about a third film, well, Black Adam with superstar Dwayne Johnson, nevertheless. after its box office failure was also, like others, instantly written off. Although initially this story was conceived precisely as a self-sufficient franchise. Similarly, failed Han Solo's Star Wars, after which Disney had to pause the release of all future Star Wars prequels and so on. That is, in fact, we now see a situation when female action films are at least no fewer, if not more, than male ones. Moreover, often, well, directly, completely wild, like Charlie's Angels or the film Damsel and Dragon from Netflix with Millie Bobby Brown. Moreover, very often such projects try to ensure themselves in advance and tie them to mega popular franchises to ensure success. And when this doesn't work, yes, often they abandon such ventures. But absolutely the same thing happens with male blockbusters or action films. And this is called simply expediency and common sense. It's clear that everywhere there are exceptions. One can now find examples of films with men in the lead role, which, despite everything, got sequels. But meanwhile, one can remember some second Lara Croft with Angelina Jolie, which was filmed not thanks to, but despite common sense. In total, the situation is such that the rules of the game are now the same for both male and female stars. And not because somewhere exists some universal conspiracy or somewhere it was conversely exposed, but because the modern market doesn't tolerate failures, requires huge investments, and accordingly tries to recoup them to the maximum. While attempts to whine that supposedly cursed men get everything for free and poor women are oppressed is a rather pathetic lot, mainly of creators or participants of those films that turned out to be junk and failed. Like the wailing of Viola Davis during the screening of The Woman King, or the cursing of Charlie's Angels creator Elizabeth Banks, who blamed a terrible patriarchal conspiracy for her film's failure. Apparently, now there's just such a trend, and this hypothesis is only confirmed by recent complaints from another Hollywood super blonde Scarlett Johansson, who in her recent interview mounted her favorite hobby horse complaints about the terrible male gaze and how it almost ruined her career and even life. Johansson stated that at the beginning of her career, supposed roles often came down to her attractiveness and satisfying exclusively men's desire. And now, the actress rejoices that the situation is beginning to change. Now, there's a different message. Many more role models of women who occupy influential positions have appeared. But when I was younger, says the actress, many roles that were offered to me or that I agreed to had ambitions or storylines revolving exclusively around their own desirability or male gaze or male-oriented stories, the actress laments. And, as if, yes, this passage could be skipped if Miss Johansson didn't raise this topic with enviable regularity. For example, back in 22, she complained that the industry so hypersexualized her at a young age that it seemed impossible to expand the range of roles. I essentially became an object and received such a stigma that I felt it was forever, says Johansson, and so on. In general, stories about male gaze, objectification, and other things suddenly became the actress's favorite topic closer to her 40th birthday. And here arises a quite reasonable question. Is Miss Johansson really so tired of these terrible roles that actually built her career and kept her in the top for 20 years and also brought tens, if not hundreds of millions of bucks? Or possibly, when the fifth decade loomed on the horizon, the actress realized that the train is leaving and the role of hot stuff that men drool over is becoming inaccessible to her, and therefore it's better to declare, "That's it, I'm tired, I've had enough." And everything I did for the last 20 years was simply inhuman exploitation, when behind my forms, I wasn't seen as a person and all that. Again, let's assume it was so, but another question arises. Who dressed Miss Johansson in such outfits like this? Who forced her to make fifth-size breasts? Also, evil men? Or simply she, being not at all a stupid young lady, understood that her type was the simplest way to receive fabulous fees while not doing some very brilliant or super complex work. What's there? Let's look at least at Scarlett's Marvel partners. And be frank, Johansson was always in good shape, but she never looked like a person spending days on end in the gym, rather like a lady more riding on what Mother Nature gave. While the same Hugh Jackman, Chris Hemsworth, or Chris Evans simply died in training for what? And really, for what? To please the toxic female gaze? By Scarlett's logic, it turns out yes. But for some reason, we don't hear complaints about objectification or consumer attitude from women from the Marvel guys. On the contrary, they, gritting their teeth, haul weights, understanding that such are the rules of the game. If you want to receive million-dollar fees for a role, be so kind as to meet physical standards. And Johansson herself, undoubtedly, perfectly realizes this too. Moreover, her, let's say, signature type is already being actively adopted by new enterprising stars. Take, for example, Sydney Sweeney. This girl, whose forms have already opened the road to Hollywood for her, as once to young Scarlett, now seems to experience no suffering about sexualization or objectification. If you're curious to see what we're talking about, click on the hint and go to our Telegram pin, because here showing such things is unfortunately impossible. But who knows? Maybe in 15 years, Sydney will also start talking about how she was terribly exploited. Oh God, it was a nightmare. But I was so young and inexperienced to resist, I was afraid and couldn't speak the truth, and therefore had to receive all these millions and even sell soap with water from my bathtub. Oh God, how I was exploited then. It's quite possible we'll hear such things too. Because, unfortunately, now there's a powerful trend that even superstars with multi-million fees actively build themselves into victims' images while blaming some toxic males. And such a trend seems only to be gaining momentum, which means the story continues. And also, don't forget to put thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thanks everyone for watching.